I still fondly look back on the good old days where we had to pick between 1 to 2 models and just would get back to work. Nowadays, there's quite a few more. In fact, there's this many more. There are a lot of models that are worth considering for the work that you do. And as somebody who built a chat app that exposes pretty much all of these models, I have a lot of thoughts. Over the last year, I've been switching between models constantly, figuring out the best things and the worst things about each of them. And I also am very cost sensitive because I host a chat app that's really cheap. $8 a month, by the way, for T3 chat, if you didn't already know. As such, I have a lot of feelings about these models. I did a short tweet a while back where I gave a gut feel ranking on how I think about and feel about them. But people wanted more info. I decided I would do a video, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized what we need to do isn't just a quick covering of these. What we needed is a more traditional tier list. And thankfully, Lermatroid from my community quickly threw together a V0 app that lets me drag and drop all the different AI models so I can go through these all with you guys to give you a feel of how I think about these models, when I use them, when I don't, and most importantly, how they compare against each other. A handful of these models are very, very expensive, like 4.5 or O1 and O1 Pro. And in order to pay these bills, we need a quick break. So quick sponsor spot, and we'll be right back after that. If you run your own business, you're going to want to pay attention for this one because today's sponsor will solve one of your biggest problems. I know that because they're a company I've been using for a very long time now. I cannot imagine how I would run my business without today's sponsor, Fondo. These guys make everything from bookkeeping to taxes way easier. And if you're not prepared for a certain deadline that's about to hit, trust me, you want to hit these guys up. If you use the link in the description, you'll get 50% off for your tax filing this year, and you will be very happy you did it. There are a ton of little things I could say about how great Fondo is, but honestly, the best way to put it is they kind of just feel like an extension of your team. You join a shared Slack with them, and they take it from there. I don't think I've ever shown you guys a sponsor that will save you this much money before. They've saved me tens of thousands of dollars for my startup, and they've made our lives significantly easier, making sure we're compliant with all these crazy things. If I was the only company using Fondo, I would understand some skepticism, but I'm one of thousands, and every one of them has been super, super happy. There's a bunch of companies here that you probably even recognize from me covering them in the past. I shouldn't be showing you guys this page, and we'll see if we manage to censor it in time, but these little things are so useful. They generate reports every month for your business and keep track of how much money you're actually spending and actually making. They even give you a calculation for how much time you have left based on the money in the bank. Getting these numbers is so annoying, and it's not even part of what they charge for. It's just a small feature you get in addition to signing up with them. I don't think there's any other company that has made me feel this much better about running my business. And if you're in a similar spot where all of these things around taxes and runway and finance management and compliance are annoying you, this will be the best money you've ever spent, I promise. And just to show that these guys get it, the only reason this ad is happening is because I went to an event hosted by the CEO of Fondo, because he's a good friend of mine and one of the few people whose startup events I actually find worth going to. And after we chatted for a bit, he realized that we could possibly collab, and I was super excited to do it. I even gave him a discount because I like the product that much. If you're running a business and don't want to hire a whole team of finance people, this is the way to go. Take my word on it. Thank you to Fondo for sponsoring today's video. Check them out today at soydev.link/Fondo. Okay, O1 and O1 Pro aren't new, whatever. I don't care about the new logos. There's a lot of little things here. We threw it together quick with V0. You get the idea. You guys wanted me to do something fancier than Figma. This is what you get. Let's do a solid, simple starting point with GPT-4o. It's kind of the perfect middle ground model where it wasn't super impressive when it dropped. Its price wasn't super competitive when it dropped, but it kind of set the bar as a normal, like right in the middle standard. That's why I'm going to put it in the B tier. Fuck all of this. I'm going back to Figma. I'm sorry. The effort was put in. Figma will just work. We're doing Figma. Oh shit. Does somebody have a better Figma for me in chat? Oh, this is so much better. This is so much better. And huge shout out to Midnight Grocer for making my Figma template way less garbage. This has been a great preview of what AI development is like. Fit in however much of that you feel like fits phase. Anyways, here we go. Much more drag and droppable. Oh, it's so good. Cool. So we have GPT-4o as my logical starting point, right in the middle of the road. I think B tier is a very good fit for 4o. It's not terrible. Does things well, doesn't do anything better than anything else. Its price was surprising at the time, and it was also a lot faster than standard GPT-4 was. It was an iterative release meant to improve on 4. and it mostly improved on performance, like speed-wise and price. It's fine as a default. It's a little expensive, especially when you look at the other models in the OpenAI list, like 4o Mini. Just for reference, I have all of the pricing here, which we'll be looking at throughout. 4o is $2.50 per million input tokens and $10 per million output tokens. 4o Mini, 15 cents per million in, 60 cents per million out. And 4o Mini is way, way faster, especially if you host it on platforms like Azure. As a result, 4o Mini, I would argue, is a very underrated model, especially when you consider what I would call revolution it helped kickstart with the chaos of cheaper, faster, small models. We wouldn't have the small models we have today if it wasn't for 4o Mini showing that there is value in these things. I'm going to put it in the A tier because I consider it, especially for its time, really, really, really good. I almost wish I had a separate tier for its impact because, I don't recommend anyone use 4o Mini right now. I just can't, in good faith, recommend that. But at the same time, 4o Mini kickstarted a lot of the things that led to the models I do recommend. Gemini 2.0 Flash. Just a reference here, I think this is going to be our first S-tier model, not because it's the smartest thing in the world, but it's a hell of a lot smarter than 4o Mini, and it's also slightly cheaper, which is unbelievable. It's just unbelievable that 2.0 Flash is cheaper than 4o Mini while being smarter than not only 4o Mini, but comparable, if not better, than 4o. If we hop over to the artificial analysis charts, you'll see 2.0 Flash is competing with Sonnet for general intelligence and is smoking 4o Mini. It's also, according to the standard intelligence test here, beating out 4o by a decent margin as well. Flash is so cheap that we offer it for free on T3 Chat when you're not even paying for the app. You can go to t3.chat, not sign in, and immediately start prompting and get 10 messages a day. Because why not? If you sign in, you get even more. And if you pay, you get way more. To emphasize it, I want to use this chart from my friends over at Artificial Analysis. Love these guys. The chart looks like garbage right now because O1 is so absurdly overpriced that it skews the entire chart. So we're going to turn that off. Hopefully this helps emphasize why Gemini Flash is so exciting to me. This green section here is the ideal because it's a chart of intelligence on the vertical axis and cost on the horizontal. So further left is good, higher up is good. Gemini here is massively revolutionary, especially when it came out when nothing else was close, because it was less than half the price of DeepSeek V3 with better performance, smarter model. It's nuts. And when you compare that to stuff like, Claude, all the way over here on the right, you start to see why Gemini is such a hype thing. It's insanely cheap relative to all these other things. And emphasize the performance side here, it's the only one in the green. It's the only one to cross the median point for performance and also cross it for intelligence. It's faster than Llama 3.1, despite being literally 3x smarter. It's a really fucking good model. And I don't want to have to sit there and wait for answers if the problem is simple enough that it could be generated by Flash. And most problems that I use AI for, Gemini 2.0 Flash is more than capable of. So I think it makes a lot of sense as a default model people reach for because you'll know quickly if the answer's wrong because you get an answer faster. It's so much faster that even if Gemini 2.0 Flash was wrong half the time, you're still saving time overall because you get the answer so fast, you realize it's wrong, and then you re-roll with a slow model. You're saving half the time on those slower models. It's absolutely worth it. And it's so cheap, it feels free. Just use Flash. It's really good. It earned its S tier spot. It is my favorite model overall by all of its characteristics right now. O3 Mini is close because the price is, again, really good. Look at how cheap it is and how high up it is here. It's the highest up that we have available in this chart. And it's very far to the side over here. It's ahead of the cheap models, but it's way below the expensive ones. Very useful chart. Again, artificial analysis is super handy. Let's go back to the OpenAI models for a bit because there's some important ones here. Specifically, O1. O1 is another one of those models that is revolutionary for what it did. It was the first prolific thinking model. It was so good at thinking and chain of thought that they refused to actually show the data for what it's thinking about. And it started a flame war between OpenAI and their biggest partner, Microsoft, who really wanted to figure out how it worked so they could use that data for their own training internally. O1 was so much better than anyone expected that it forced me to do some videos basically apologizing for saying that AI had plateaued. O1 is insane for what it offers. but the price reflects that. O1's API cost is $15 per million in and $60 per million out. 6 times more expensive than 4.0, which is already 25 times more expensive than Gemini Flash. That's insane. This model is just so absurdly expensive, and it's not because they're way overcharging to make a ton of profit on it. It just takes a lot of compute to process because the amount of data and other things that are in this model is just insane. They are losing money with a lot of the stuff they do with O1, especially the $200 a month Pro subscription. O1 isn't overpriced relative to how hard it is to run. It's overpriced relative to the quality of the output, especially in the DeepSeek era. The more I think about this, I might have put things a little too high up initially. I think I'm going to bump 4.0. God, this is annoying, Taylor. I think I'm going to bump 4.0 down. I'm going to bump 4.0 mini down as well. And I'm going to put O1 in that revolutionary, but not something you should actually use tier. Because it kickstarted thinking as we know it today, but at what cost? Kind of insanely expensive. It's also worth noting that the output cost isn't directly comparable because it is doing more output because it's thinking. And they're charging you for these tokens during thinking that you can't even see. So if you ask the same thing to 4.0 and O1, O1's going to generate way more output tokens too. I am curious enough. Okay, yeah, this is a lot better. Lermo challenged himself to get this build working, and it appears he did a great job. So I'm going to catch us up real quick with a much better UI for this. Once again, thank you to the community for making a much better tool for me to actually do this all in. Way nicer. So, what do we place next? Think we need a good low tier right now. I'm going to put QWQ in the F tier. I know this is controversial, but I don't care. I've never had to work so hard to make a model behave at all. I know technically speaking, it ranked really well, but it still sucks. It still is so much work to make it behave at all. I have a whole video about this model and my attempts to try and get it to work. I invented my own metric that I call the weight watcher, which is how many times does it say wait or when it asks itself stuff. It just loops forever. I struggled so hard to get any reasonable output out of the QWQ model, and not just like in my own deployment with T3 chat, but in their own web app too. After a lot of finagling and playing around with temperature settings and whatnot, we got it to an almost usable point, but it was hell to get it there. People are asking how often is this used in T3 chat? That's a great question. Let's check our analytics quick. Here's our usage of models all time. QWQ's been used 10,000 times. Meanwhile, like all the different R1 deployments, because we have multiple of them, we've changed providers and such throughout. Night and day gap there. But like compared to the big ones, like Flash at 1.34 million messages and 4.0 Mini over a million. To be clear, 4.0 Mini's flatlined since we switched Gemini Flash to the default. Still pretty good. But the comparison between literally 10,000 and over a million is hilarious. It's not a model a lot of people use. They played with it to try it out, but they're not going back to QWQ. It is reasonably priced, thankfully. That's like the one benefit. But a well-priced shit sandwich is still a shit sandwich. I can throw in 2.5 here, the standard Qwen model, the non-thinking version. I'll put this one in C tier. And you know what? I'm going to put Llama 3.3 in the same spot. Why am I putting these next to each other? Because by themselves, they suck. If you're hitting Qwen or Llama directly, you're probably using more compute than necessary to get an answer that's not very good. But these models do have a couple strengths. Strength 1 has almost nothing to do with them. It's this company, Grok. Grok builds their own chips to make AI inference way faster. And when I say way faster, I mean like 100 times faster. The speed that Grok inference goes at is just unbelievable. We hop to T3 chat and I go over to our Llama distilled model, which is distilled Llama. Remember, Llama's the thing that we're talking about right now. And ask it to solve advent of code 2021 day 3 in Python. Do you see how fast this is outputting? I can barely scroll fast enough to keep up. You certainly can't read that fast. It just flies. It takes seconds to do what other models take minutes to do. These models are very efficient, not because just the model is great, but Grok was able to architect CPUs just to do that type of inference really fast. The way that Llama and Qwen are architected makes them work really well with Grok's chips, and the result is performance that's unbelievable, at least in terms of speed. The quality of those models, however, not as consistent and as much of a guarantee. Thankfully, that's where our friends over at DeepSeek come in, because the DeepSeek R1 standard model was revolutionary. It's tempting to put it in S tier. The only reason I'm not is because I don't think you should actually use this model. DeepSeek R1 was a game changer in bringing the power of reasoning models to the open source world. Magical moment. However, running this model sucked. It sucked hard. The official APIs for R1 went down within a day of the model going live and stayed down for like 2+ weeks because they were getting more traffic than they knew what to do with. The other providers of R1 were running it so slowly that I couldn't recommend using it at all. If we hop over to our friends at Artificial Analysis to see quickly, and we look at the different providers, you'll see that the majority of these providers are running the model at like 10 to 20 tokens per second. Just for a random reference point, our 4.0 mini deployment runs at 160 to 180 tokens per second. 8x slower is a big deal, and you feel it. This is slower than reading speed. And if I go rerun this prompt using the standard R1 via OpenRouter, rerun, you'll see the difference. This is real time. Do you understand? Not even close. That said, this is a very, very smart model. And if you look at the benchmarks and how it ranks in intelligence, it beats out some much more expensive models. It's powerful. It's good. There's a lot of awesome things R1 did. It's just too slow to be practical. Thankfully, they knew that, and they used DeepSeek to distill its knowledge into other smaller models that are easier to run, like, Qwen and Llama. When R1 came out, they didn't just release it as a single monolithic giant model. They also released it alongside their distilled models on these smaller bases that are significantly easier to run. That's why Qwen and Llama can do incredible things, not as Qwen or Llama, but as I just showed in T3 chat, they can do those things as a distilled version of DeepSeek R1. When I first put out the R1 distilled version of DeepSeek on T3 chat, a bunch of people were flaming me for daring to call it R1 when it isn't. They published it as R1. That is what they called it. That said, it's not the actual proper full R1. It is effectively faking how R1 performs because they distilled the original DeepSeek models learnings onto a smaller one. It will never be as good as the big models, but man, the results I have gotten from R1 have been nuts. And for things like coding challenges, R1 Llama distill is often what I reach for to this day. I've been very impressed with the quality of the responses I get out of this model, and I don't find myself reaching for standard R1 almost ever. All of that said, R1 distilled is still not quite smart enough or reliable enough to make it to S tier, but I would put these next to each other because the standard R1 kicked off a revolution in what we expect from models, and it really started this new open model world that we're in today. R1 distilled performs way better and shows the power of distillation, but it's still not quite as smart as R1, which makes it a harder sell, especially in a world where OpenAI responds. The first OpenAI model I'm going to put into S tier is O3 Mini. Holy fuck, this model blew me away. O3 Mini makes me question almost everything else OpenAI does because it's cheaper and better than everything else they offer. Reminder that 4.0, which came out way earlier, $2.50 per million in, $10 per million out. O1, $15 per million in, $60 per million out. O3 Mini, $1.10 per million in, less than half the price of 4.0, and $4.40 per million out. Less than half the price of 4.0. Still, that's huge. But these numbers look a little weird. They're not perfect fractions to their other prices. The reason is they priced it at exactly double R1. 440 versus 219 and 110 versus 55 cents. It was very clear that the price point they hit with O3 Mini was directed to be a response to DeepSeek R1. Since O3 Mini is also a mini model, it flies. Its output speeds are nuts. It performs really, really well. It does have catches, though. We don't have access to its thinking data. So if I run the same query I just ran here with the thinking models with DeepSeek, we get this reasoning data, which is it thinking to itself before giving the answer. It's a big part of why it's so smart. If I switch this over to use O3 Mini, I'll throw it on low compute so I don't waste a whole bunch of money for no reason. We wait, and then we start getting an answer. We start getting an answer pretty impressively quick, but we don't get anything for a minute because it's doing thinking at that point, and they're not sending that data to us. They have some of it in their web app, but it's summaries of what it was thinking about. They are not transparent about what it does before it puts out that output. So you end up in that loading state. And when you're using high compute, you just sit there for a while and you don't know if it's working or not, which sucks. And OpenAI has not given us a way to provide a better experience for our users over the API, which makes me tempted to lower it. But it's such a fucking good model, I can't do it. It is my default for hard problems. It is hilariously cheap. It's cost us 1/5 as much as Claude has cost us, despite being used roughly the same amount. It's a phenomenal model. O3 Mini shows me what OpenAI is capable of, and I'm very excited for more things like it in the future. But the only reason O3 Mini came out so good is they were terrified of R1 and had to respond. Speaking of things that cost me too much money, we need to talk about the Claude models. I'm just going to do it, and we'll talk about it after. Okay. I put 3.5 in S tier. I put 3.7 with reasoning in A tier. And I put 3.7 standard in B tier. I have a couple reasons for all of these decisions. Claude 3.5 in S tier, not because it's a good value, because let's be frank, when we look at the prices, it's not. It's more expensive than 4.0. And when we look at the benchmarks, 3.5 isn't even in this chart anymore, but 3.7's performing comparably to 2.0 Flash, despite being more than 30x as expensive. Why am I putting that in S tier then? Because when 3.5 dropped, it represented a massive quality bump in what we could do as developers with AI. I don't know if it was a lucky roll. I don't know if it was the training data. I don't think it was the training data because 3.7 is not as good at it. But by a lot of different things coming together, 3.5 became the first model that I would argue is not just good at code, is great at it. Especially when it comes to those UI things not being trampled by an aggressive intern rewriting everything in the process. 3.7 Sonnet and Sonnet Reasoning, thinking whatever they call it, can both do great UI as well. But the best description I've seen of how they behave is they almost feel like an excited intern just going around rewriting everything that they can get their hands on. Definitely the vibe I have had playing with 3.7, and I went back to 3.5 as my default in Cursor. The other big benefit of 3.5 Sonnet is how absurdly good it is at following instructions with things like tools and agents. Most of the crazy, powerful agentic flows people are talking about building, the tools that have 15 steps that use all these other things, 3.5 was the first model that was great at using tools and doing things with tool calls. It's also a big part of why they built stuff like MCP, because they needed a way for models to have control over other things. Because 3.5 was good enough at doing that they wanted to improve the tooling around it. 3.5 kind of kickstarted the agentic revolution, as well as the wave of these AI dev tools, especially things like Lovable, V0, and Bolt that let you generate new UIs. Almost all of these things are just built around Claude 3.5 in the background. That said, the cost is absurd. And the fact that 3.7 consistently performs worse for the ways that we use 3.5 while still being priced the same is offensive. If they had just cut the price of 3.5 by like 30% when 3.7 came out, or had 3.7 with a different name that was cheaper, everything could be very, very different. But 3.5, it's expensive for what it is. And as such, I will usually reach for Flash or O3 Mini in tools like T3 Chat, both because they are faster, and in the case of O3 Mini, it's smarter. And then if I don't get the answer I'm looking for, or I'm not happy with the result, I'll quickly pop over to 3.5. That said, holy hell, the costs of Claude are absurd. Ugh. Yeah. Claude is so expensive for us that we had to change how we do credits fundamentally in T3 Chat. Because of the absurd price of Claude, we can't include it in our standard messaging tier, which includes every other model right now, by the way. You can use O3 Mini 1,500 times. You can use Gemini 1,500 times. You can use all the models we provide 1,500 times a month for $8, except for Claude. You get 100 Claude messages a month instead. We had to split this out because we would actually go bankrupt otherwise. There were individual users who cost us $400 to $600 in their $8 allocation. Fundamentally, like, we would have been out of business if we didn't make this change. None of the other models have had costs even close to the point where we would consider this, simply because they cost less. So yeah, I have strong opinions because we have insane costs. And like, talk all the shit you want. This is an absurd number considering the fact that the next highest bill is a fifth the price. And remember, 1.3 million Gemini messages cost us like $1,600 to $1,800. These Claude messages cost us probably 40 grand total across the last 3 months. It's about half as many messages, and it cost us 40 times as much money. It is what it is. With all of that said, hopefully you get why I'm putting 3.5 up here, even if it's bankrupting me. It kickstarted a revolution. It made developers trust AI in ways they never had before, and it allowed for different use cases that we didn't think AI would do for years to be done in months. Even this tool we're using here, the AI model tier list, this was generated in V0 originally, and V0 uses 3.5 as far as I know. Makes a ton of sense. 3.7 and especially 3.7 reasoning have a habit of going off the rails and touching things they probably shouldn't. And the reasoning version especially likes to do, if you give it tools, it will call them, and it will cost you a lot of money as it does that. It's smart though. I need to be realistic here. I feel better about that. The reason I'm keeping the 3.7 reasoning so high is that it was the first time a big lab didn't hide the reasoning data. As I showed before, OpenAI was very aggressive and quick to hide the reasoning data when you use their models. So O3 just didn't show us its reasoning at all. Anthropic went the other way. Not only do they show the reasoning, they actually admitted that they don't know why it works, which I found hilarious. They are sharing the reasoning in their words so that we as a community can do our best to understand why this is good and why this works well, because they saw it worked better than they expected. They just wanted to understand why. So they don't hide any of this data. The reason the other companies hide it is they don't want their competition to have it in order to train their models better. Google is hiding it. OpenAI is hiding it. Anthropic isn't. And I was surprised for that. I think it's dope of them to not only not hide it in their UI, but to expose it over the API. I wish more models had the balls to do that. Speaking of models with balls, Gemini 2.5 Pro. I think this is a solid A tier. I have not used it enough. Like, of all the models on the screen, 2.5 Pro is the one I have used the least because it came out yesterday. It was probably been out for longer by the time this video ships. 2.5 Pro slaughters benchmarks, but there are catches. The catches are, we don't know how much it's going to cost yet, and they're not giving us the reasoning data. What's funny about 2.5 Pro is the reasoning's all there in AI Studio. You can see it, and it's not obfuscated. It's the full text of the reasoning. They just refuse to expose it over API for some reason. Very weird. Very weird. And we also, again, don't know the price. So of all of the placements here, I would say the 2.5 Pro one is the most speculative. If it ends up being really cheap, I'll keep it here, maybe even bump it up. But if it ends up being comparably priced to 4.0, I would lower it a bit. It really matters, like, how does the pricing compare to DeepSeek? If it ends up cheaper, it'll go in the front. If it ends up way cheaper, it goes up here. If it ends up more expensive, it goes down. Speaking of price and comparisons to 3.5, I think I need to do a long rant about DeepSeek V3. I'm going to do something a little spicy here. DeepSeek V3 kickstarted the new era of AI. R1 was built on DeepSeek V3, and V3 proved that an open model company that has no clear path to selling licenses or things like certain companies that begin with M and end in Estrel do. V3 was on drop, cheaper than 4.0 mini, and its performance was right there next to 3.5. That was crazy. V3 was so mind-blowing when it dropped in December last year that I kind of just dropped everything to figure it out. I was going to the Vercel office and talking to them about how crazy this model was, and they said I was insane. I was hanging out with all the other AI bros I know in SF and showing them the performance of this is nuts. The web app sucks, but it's such a capable model for the price. Everyone thought I was crazy. The other big thing with V3 when it dropped was the speed of the inference on the official DeepSeek API. It was consistently in the 100 to 150 tokens per second range, which late last year, most models were not fast. The idea of fast models kind of was kickstarted with V3. 4.0 mini could be fast, but the official deployment through OpenAI wasn't. V3 was significantly faster. The reason V3 honestly fundamentally changed my life is the UI for it was so bad that I had taken all of my frustrations with the Claude UI and the ChatGPT UI, realized V3 was even worse, and was just too annoyed about it to sit there and stare at it. So I started building T3 Chat. T3 Chat would not exist if it wasn't for DeepSeek V3 being such an incredible model that I wanted a better UI for it. And I was blown away. It would have been the only model we had at launch if it wasn't for the fact that the API performance went to shit the day before we went live. I can find the chart somewhere. It's not going to be easy. But when I started using V3, it was hitting that 120 token per second number. By the time we were ready to launch a week or two later, it was down to like 20 to 30 tokens per second. And the whole branding of T3 Chat at the time was the fastest AI chat app ever. If our inference is half the speed of 4.0 mini on OpenAI, that's not viable. After hunting around and spending a bunch of time on my favorite site, Artificial Analysis, I concluded that at the time, the best performance to price to speed to quality ratio was 4.0 mini, but not 4.0 mini hosted on OpenAI. It was 4.0 mini hosted on Azure. I used to keep this info very private because I didn't want people to know our secrets for going so fast. I don't care anymore because 4.0 mini is kind of a shit model. We were able to consistently hit numbers twice as fast as what OpenAI does out of their official API by hosting it on Azure instead. At the time, it honestly felt groundbreaking. Getting performance like this with a model people were familiar with was unbelievable. You would open up the official ChatGPT site and our site, paste the same query to the same model, and ours would be done when the other was less than halfway through. It was so cool. And that is the only reason V3 wasn't our default model, even though it was way smarter and similarly priced to 4.0 mini. It was just that the hosting for it sucked. Since then, the hosting has improved, but then R1 dropped, and everyone was so focused on R1 that they stopped paying attention to V3, which was the foundational model that allowed for R1 to exist in the first place. And this is why I'm going to put V3 O324 edition very high up as well. I haven't used this model enough to confidently S-tier it, but I've seen the results enough to confidently frontline A-tier it. The update to V3 was very quietly done. They didn't even announce it until 2 days later. The performance results, though, they're nuts. It is definitely a refinement. It is not a fundamentally new model, but it is a refinement that puts it over GPT 4.5. That seems pretty cool. Obviously, 4.5 is not as good as a thinking model, but when we compare that with the price, you'll understand how genuinely absurd this is. V3 had cheaper pricing initially. They bumped it because they wanted to honor the V2 pricing initially. This is what V3 costs officially through the DeepSeek APIs. 27 cents per million in, $1.10 per million out, versus $75 per million in, $150 per million out. That is a 278 times more expensive input token and roughly 150 times more expensive output. And the new V3 performs better than 4.5 does. Do you see why this is such a big deal? V3 O324, which stands for March 24th, is positioned to make DeepSeek R2 the best model ever made. And I think the reason that DeepSeek was so quiet about this drop is they know that most people only pay attention to them for the R series, not knowing that the V series is incredibly underrated and is the glue that holds together the R series models. V3 O324 is going to power the best model ever made. At the very least, is going to power the best open source model ever made. And I would expect R2 to fundamentally destroy our expectations, similar to how R1 did just a little bit ago, earlier this year. Thank you, DeepSeek, for fundamentally changing how I think about AI and giving me the motivation to kickstart my own AI business. It's, of the models here, it's the only one that I could say changed my life. So V3, phenomenal model, super underrated, still really smart. And if the hosting was a bit better and it could run a bit faster, reliably, I would probably use it as my default instead of 3.5 or Flash. It's just not fast enough, again, because of the hosting, because all the people who can host V3 would rather host R1 and make more money, which I understand. But V3 is possibly the best non-thinking model ever made. Speaking of best non-thinking model, GPT 4.5. I will admit bias here. I was lucky enough to get early access to 4.5, and I don't think I've ever been more confused in my life. I tried my hardest to figure out what it was good at and couldn't. So I just outright asked the people who had given me access, like, what do you guys think this is good at? Because I'm not getting good answers for code. And they said, oh yeah, it's not great at code. We're actually going to tell people that though. It's a much more personal model. I struggle to believe that. And if it was just me, I would take their word for it. But then Karpathy did a phenomenal, hilarious poll where he asked 4.0 and 4.5 the same question as like a creative writing prompt for 5 different questions, posted the answers on Twitter, and had people vote for which one they preferred between 4 and 4.5. Not knowing which one was 4 or 4.5, just picking between A and B. And it was hard to pick for a handful of them. Like, I went through this in my 4.5 video, but the results weren't out yet. The results are out now. 4.5 lost 4 out of 5 times. So I don't know what the fuck they're saying when they say it writes better. I certainly don't know what the fuck they're saying when they price it the way they're pricing it. $75 per million in. It's absurd. It's so absurd that it's the first model we offered on T3 chat via bring your own key because we cannot provide this to our users at our current price tier. It's not possible. So why the hell would they even release this model? I, funny enough, think it's the same reason that the new V3 came out. Because it is the foundation they're building their new stuff on top of. The same way R2 will be on the latest V3, O4 will be on the latest 4.5. Why are they charging this much? Because it's a gigantic model and it costs them this much. They're not arbitrarily pricing this super high for the sake of it. They're doing it because that's what it costs them. It's a massive model, and as such, it has more knowledge of the world than almost any other model has squeezed into it. It's better at prose and writing than previous OpenAI models by a decent bit, but I still find it less personal than 3.5. I still find it less fun than almost any of the models here. And honestly, I find it dumber than O3 Mini, which makes sense because O3 Mini is a reasoning model, but it doesn't make sense because it's 75 times cheaper. So 4.5 has to be our first D tier. I'm not putting it in F because it can do things and it can do them okay. And its world knowledge is crazy and is a gigantic model. It's impressive that they squeezed that much stuff into one model. I wish I shared more of the numbers on how many trillions of parameters it's trained on, but Open and OpenAI hasn't meant open for a while now. I would F tier it, but that doesn't do enough to emphasize just how bad the QWQ experience was for me. So we'll keep that in D tier. Speaking of unnecessarily expensive, O1 Pro. It's better than 4.5 because it can answer things nothing else can. O1 Pro has been out for a while now, but they only recently exposed it over the API. And when they did that, they raised the bar for price. $150 per million in and $600 per million out is just meme tier. It's absurdity. I cannot fathom that they put it out at this price. But again, they're not doing it to make a bunch of money. They're doing it because people are asking for it. They already have it. They need to expose it. They need to not lose money exposing it. I'm sure they have a profit margin on this, but I'm sure it's less than 50%. It's probably closer to 10 to 20 at best. These models just are that expensive to run. It also sucks to use O1 Pro because it fundamentally breaks the UI and overall experience on the ChatGPT site. When it first dropped and I paid the $200 a month to use it, the site just barely worked. I would start generating an answer, get impatient because it took forever, go spin up a new thread using a different, cheaper, faster model, and the O1 Pro generation would just stop and fail because you can't do it in the background. And the mobile experience is even worse. I had such a bad time with O1 Pro. I felt like I was fighting the model and the website every step along the way. It definitely built a subconscious motivation to destroy the ChatGPT site because the O1 Pro model was already destroying it so quickly. It answered advent of code problems nothing else could. It can solve hard problems nothing else will. Not a lot of them, but it is a percentage win. It is 5 to 10% better the next best thing at solving really hard problems, but 5 to 10% better doesn't justify 50 to 100 times more expensive. Yeah. OpenAI has quite the spread on this chart. I'm impressed. We got quite the set of rejects to end us with here. We'll go through them. Start with DeepSeek R1 Qwen distilled. I think top of D tier is fair here, not because the Qwen distillation is bad, but with the Llama distill being so much less quirky, it's hard to justify the Qwen distilled. These both came out at the same time. They both perform really well. They hit crazy benchmarks. They both run on Grok, and they run on Grok pretty well. And Grok with a Q, not a K. We'll be Grok with a K in a minute. Overall, Qwen distill is fine. It's probably the best model in this tier in terms of cost, performance, speed, benchmarks, whatever. But it's hard to justify when it comes out at the same time as something that is smarter and less quirky. So I'm personally not a big fan of the Qwen distill. It is what it is for me. Gemini Flash Lite. This is tough for me. I think I'm going to do B tier. Hear me out. Google kind of screwed themselves with the 2.0 Flash pricing. Flash Lite is a smaller, faster, dumber model that is pretty much the cheapest model you can reasonably use for anything. 7.5 cents per million in and 30 per mil out. Unbelievably cheap. However, 2.0 Flash standard is only 10 cents per million out more and 2.5 cents per million in more. The size of the gap here, well, the minuscule nature of the gap between these two, the 25% discount from Flash to Flash Lite, makes it a much harder sell. Like at that point, I would just use Flash because it's so, like, Flash is already cheaper than most mini models from other providers. Like Flash is cheaper than Opus, it's cheaper than 4.0 Mini, cheaper than V3, even with its previous pricing. It's so cheap that having a lighter version doesn't feel that valuable. It's just hard to justify. If this had come out first, or if Gemini 2 Flash was priced more high, then Flash Lite would be a much better deal. Even if it was half the price of Gemini 2.0 standard Flash. Easy sell. And if I was to just hide this from the UI entirely and put that there, it would be the default in everything I build. But the gap between here and here is so small that it's hard for me to give a shit. And I'm pretty sure we don't use Flash Lite anywhere anymore. For a bit, we were using it for title gen. Let me go double check quick. Yeah, no. In T3 chat, we're just using standard 2.0 Flash right now because it's really fast for title gen. This is also nice because we stream down the title generation before the rest of the response. And we always use Flash for the title gen, which means it's always really quick, even if the model you select is slow. This is the type of thing I would have expected a Flash Lite model to be great for. But we don't bother because standard Flash is already so fast, so cheap, and so smart that it's hard to care. That margin, that gap between the two is the biggest issue with Flash Lite. And it feels bad placing it lower simply because 2.0 Flash is so absurdly cheap. But that's the only reason this model makes very little sense nowadays. And to wrap things up, Grok 3. Obviously, best S tier. It's the only one that can make racial jokes and talk to me sexually with a voice. Real talk, though, I don't know how to place Grok simply because they've been lying about the API now for a month and a half. They promised us the API was coming very, very soon when they first announced Grok 3. They promised us we'd be able to use the API in no time. A month and a half later, they put up a form on their website you could fill out. It wasn't even a form. It was a link to an email address. You could send them emails asking for access. I did within 2 hours of it going live. The next day, they replaced that with a form that I filled out within an hour of it going live. And I have still not heard back, nor do I know anyone who has. I feel like they're hiding something. There is very little reason that they would take this long to release the API that isn't something sketchy. It could be that they're scared that I have too much clout on Twitter and I'm pulling T3 chat users that could have been their users. Probably not the case, but considering how much I've been harassing them, I wouldn't be surprised. It could be that their infra isn't stable enough for the huge boost. Maybe. Or it could be that they know it's going to look really, really bad when they pull it up on artificial analysis. And artificial analysis is only putting models on here that they can hit via an API because that's how they benchmark it. So my honest guess is that they're terrified of the artificial analysis guys, and that's why they're not doing it. But man, it's pathetic that they have not released the API yet. I would be surprised if it comes out within the next 2 months, honestly, because they are just pretending developers don't exist while also bragging about its performance. It does seem like they're sensitive about developer stuff in general, because one of the employees at XAI publicly posted about how Grok 3 is really good at a lot of things, but not necessarily great at code, and he got fired for it. So sure, it makes funny, edgy jokes. Sure, it helps them sell subscriptions to Twitter. I'm F-tiering it for the lies. I don't care how good the model is if they don't let me fucking use it or bench it or do any of the things I need to do to know how good it actually is. We don't know what it costs. We don't know how it performs. We don't know how it compares. We don't know if we're ever getting an API. The website's nice. The UI for Grok is cool. I'll give them that. Stream resumption is dope. If we were ranking these based on the website, it probably competes with T3 chat. That's probably why they don't want it built into other sites, because they want their site to do really well. I don't care. They're hiding things. They're acting like shit. They're lying. We will see what happens when the API comes out. Until then, I'm on Team Assassin's Creed. Ratio the fuck out of them. I want to try it. I do. I'm very excited. You know what? I'm going to prove myself here. XAI working. Here's a PR that I opened on T3 chat on February 17th. It hasn't merged because I thought they would drop the new model right then. I legitimately thought I would get to go change 2 variables, have Grok 3 support, and ship it day 1. It's been a month and a half. The fuck? Yeah, I don't care. They need to stop lying and actually ship something if they want respect from me. For now, F tier where it belongs. Similar to QWQ being unusable, Grok 3 is literally unusable unless you happen to like their website and app. Something this tier list doesn't show is how I actually use all these different models practically day to day. That almost feels like it deserves its own video. Let me know if you think I should do that in the comments. But the quick TLDR I will give is my default model is Gemini 2.0 Flash. It's a combination of not wanting to cost us a ton of money on T3 chat, the responses being really, really fast, the features of the model, because it has search built in, it has image recognition built in, it has PDF parsing, a giant context window. There's very little Flash can't do. I found it to be a really good default model. If it doesn't answer in a way that's satisfactory, I'll just hop to the bottom of T3 chat, click a smarter model, usually, admittedly, O3 mini, pick the reasoning depending on how hard the thing is and how much I care, scroll back up, and hit reroll. And now, hopefully, I'll get a better answer than I did the first time. And I'll be honest, it's been 50-50 as to whether or not switching to O3 gets me an answer when Gemini didn't. But Gemini has saved me so much trouble because 90% of the time, it is good enough. And when I search T3 chat, like, list all the breeds of corgis, T3 with unduck, this I have set the default to Flash. And it's really, really nice. I have been blown away at how convenient it is to use Gemini Flash for general questions and prompting and even code stuff. Something I actually do a lot is ffmpeg script to convert a WebM to a 720p MP4, T3. And now I can just click this, hop back to my terminal, and get right back to where I was. It's so nice. And other models just aren't as quick to get me an answer without compromising on the quality. So I almost always recommend starting with Gemini. And if it isn't good enough, O3 Mini if the problem is hard, and Claude if the problem is CSS. These are the 3 I use every day. I do have a lot of fun playing with the Llama Distill, but I often find myself just opening Llama Distill in a cloned thread while I wait for O3 Mini to answer. Generally speaking, I think this will get you pretty far, and obviously as new models come out, this will start to change, as it always does. But Flash to start, O3 if it's too hard for Flash, and Claude if I need it to look really nice. I tend to manually reach for 3.5, but recently, I'm letting it auto-select with the latest version of Cursor, because it's fun, and it's doing a decent enough job. I've been relatively impressed with it. We'll see how I feel long-term, but 3.5 is still my default model within code tools. O3 is still my default model for hard problems, and Flash is my default for literally everything else. That's all I got for now. Let me know what you guys think. Am I super off base or am I pretty on point? Flame me in the comments as you love to do. Until next time, keep prompting.